Hello everyone, and in this video we will build an application for nodes using MERN stack and Tailwind CSS to style our project. And also we will use Postman to test our routes. Here you can create a node by clicking this button. So let's create a node. You can edit it. And you can delete it. Also, here you can search for nodes that you need. So let's try to do it. As you can see, we have the node that we need. Let's try one more time. So this is how it works. So let's get started. So now, as you can see, I have this empty folder. And now I will open my terminal and write the following. Let's write npm init-y to set up a package.json file, which is essential for managing a Node.js project's dependencies and configuration. As you can see, now we have package.json file. Okay, now let's create two folders, backend and frontend. And everything related to backend should be installed in the root, and everything related to frontend should be installed inside frontend folder, so that when we deploy this application, it will be easier for us. Now let's install the following packages. So it will be for backend, so that's why I will write it in the root. So let's install Express to work with Express Mongoose, to be able to work with MongoDB, then bcrypt.js to hash our passwords, .env to get access to the environment variables, everywhere in our application, and JSON Web Token to create and verify tokens. So now let's press enter and install them. As you can see, now we have this node modules folder and package log.json file. And also in our dependencies, you can see that we have the dependencies that we have just installed. Okay, now inside backend folder, we can create a new file called server.js. And here I want to say import Express from Express. But right now, this syntax isn't available. To make it available, here under these scripts, I can come here and write type. And from here, I want to choose module. So let's choose it and save the file. Now, this syntax is available to me. Okay, now let's create an instance of an Express application by saying const app will be equal to Express. Okay, now we can do the following. When someone visits our homepage, for example, let's send the following. Let's say that we want to have request and response, and as our message, we want to say hello world. So what does it mean? It means that when someone visits our homepage, the one who visits our homepage will see this message. So when someone visits the root URL, that's just slash, as you can see. This function will run, and it takes a request and a response and sends back the text hello world to the browser. Request is what comes to us from a client, and response is what we send to a client who is requesting. Okay. Now let's do the following. I will close my terminal so that you'll be able to see everything better. And now let's say that our app will listen on some port. So now let's immediately create a variable inside .env file. So in the root, let's create a file called .env. Here we will store some sensitive information about our application. And here I will create a variable called port, and I will assign it to be 5000, and I will save it. Now to get access to this port variable, we need to import .env from .env first of all. Okay, and now we need to say .env .config. So by doing this, we will be able to get access to our environment variable. Okay, and here I will create a variable called port, and I want to get access to it by saying process.env and the name of our variable, which is port. In case of some errors, we can manually type so that it will be 5000. So why we can write process.env and then the name of a variable is because we import .env from .env and say .env.config. So that's why we can do it. So let's copy this port and paste it here. And then we can write console.log. So let's say server started at port and our port. But for that, let's use backsticks and say server started at port and then a $sign and the name of our variable. So let's save it. And as you can see, we have a very minimal structure of our application. So now let's open our terminal and let's go to the backend folder. And from here, I want to start our application. So I will say node and then I will say server.js. So let's press enter. And as you can see, we have server started at port 5000. So let's open it. So as you can see, here I see this message, hello world. Now I will split my screen so that you'll be able to see everything better. Okay, now we see this message. Let's say that we want to make some changes. For example, let's write something like this. And now I will save my file and refresh the page. But as you can see, we don't see the changes that we have just made. To see the changes that we made, we need to stop our server by the command Ctrl+C. So let's do it. Now we stopped our server and we need to restart it. So I will write node server.js again. And as you can see, server started at port 5000. Now I will refresh it and only then I can see the changes that I made. But it isn't convenient. So to handle this, we can install NodeMon. So with NodeMon, we will be able to see the changes that we make immediately after saving a file. And of course, after refreshing the page. So with NodeMon, we don't need to stop our server and restart it again. All we need is to make some changes, save the file and refresh the page. And after that, we'll be able to see the changes that we made. So now I will stop the server again. And now I want to install NodeMon. But I want to install it as a dev dependency. So that's why I write this command. And here I want to write NodeMon. So let's open our package.json. And as you can see here, we have only dependencies. But now, after pressing enter, let's see what we'll have. As you can see, we have dev dependencies and inside we have NodeMon. So now we need to make some changes in our package.json. We can remove this test completely. So let's say that here we want to have dev and then the path to our server.js. So here we want to say NodeMon and then backend and server.js. So let's save it. Now I will clear my terminal, go to this server.js, and I want to make some changes again. So I saved it, and now I just need to start my application. So I will write npm run dev. Why? Because here we wrote dev, and when we wrote dev, it means that we can write npm run dev. Okay. So now our application should start. So I will press enter. So let's do it. And as you can see, NodeMon starting. So now I will refresh the page, and as you can see, I have this text that I wrote. I want to make some more changes, so let's save it. And as you can see, NodeMon restarting due to changes that we made. But we don't immediately see the changes that we made, but we will see them after we refresh the page. But without NodeMon, we would need to stop our application completely and restart it again. But with NodeMon, all we need is to refresh our page. So that's why NodeMon can be useful. Okay, I will remove all this text and leave only hello world, refresh the page, and here it is. Okay, I think that now it's time to get our connection string so that we'll be able to work with our database. So for that, let's visit the website of MongoDB. So here I am on mongodb.com. I will click sign in. If you don't have an account, you need to register first, and after that you can sign in. Okay, here I will choose Google and continue. Here let's click new project and then project name. I will write MERN Nodes app. Let's click next. Let's click create project, and here let's click create. Here we want to choose this free option, and I don't want to preload sample dataset, so I will uncheck it, and everything else can be left as it is. So now let's click create deployment. And as you can see, we have our username and password. So let's copy our password, and inside .env file, for now, let's just put it here. And let's create a variable called mongo_URI. Okay, let's get back to the MongoDB website. So here, let's click create database user, and then choose a connection method. Here we need to choose drivers, and we can copy this, our connection string. We can copy this connection string, so let's do it, and let's paste it here. And we don't even need to paste our password here because it is already here, so we can remove it. And then we can create our database name. So here we can say nodes or something else. It's up to you. Okay, so let's save this file and get back to the website. Here, let's click done. And then we can go to clusters and browse collections. And as you can see, we don't have any data yet. So let's get back to the code. Now, inside backend folder, we can create a new folder called config. And inside config folder, we can create a file called db.js. So here, let's say import mongoose from mongoose, and let's create a function called connectDB. It has to be asynchronous. And here, let's use try and catch block. Okay. Here, let's create a variable called con, a short version for connection, and then we need to say await mongoose dot connect, and then we need to use our connection string. So for that, we can say process.env.mongo_URI. Okay. Then to see if we managed to connect or not, we can say console.log, and using backsticks, we can say MongoDB connected. And here we can say con.connection.host. So if everything is correct, we will see this console log. In case of some errors, we can also console log this error and stop our application by saying process.exit with 1. So if it is 1, it means that it is failure, and our application will immediately stop. Okay, so let's save this file, and inside server.js, we can use our connectDB function. So here, let's import connectDB. Here it is. And we shouldn't forget to write .js, otherwise we will have some errors. And let's call this function right here. Okay, now before saving our file, I will open my terminal, and only now I will save my file. So let's see what we have. As you can see, it takes some time, but now we see that MongoDB connected. It means that everything went correctly and we established a connection with our database. MongoDB connected and this host, it means that everything went correctly and it is great. Okay, so now let's close our terminal, and inside backend folder, we can create one more folder called models. So here, let's create a new file called Node.js. And here, basically, we want to define what kind of properties we want our node to have. Okay, so here, let's say import mongoose from mongoose. So you will understand everything as we continue. And here, let's create a variable called node schema will be equal to new mongoose.schema. Here we want our node to have a title, so let's say title, and we want its type to be string, and it has to be required, so we need to say required will be true. Also, we want to have a description, so let's say description, and we can just copy this and paste it here because it will be string and it will be true. Later, we want to have one more field created by, so it will refer to a user who created this node. But for now, we will leave it as it is. And then we want to know when our node was created. So we can say timestamps to be true. So by doing this, we will know when a node was created or updated. Okay, now let's say const node will be equal to mongoose.model. Then let's say that it will be node and the name of our variable, which is node schema. And now we just need to say export default node so that we will be able to use this model and work with it. So let's save it, and we have just created a model for node, and I think that everything is clear to you. Now let's create one more model for a user. So let's say user.js. Here let's also import mongoose from mongoose, and let's do the following. Let's say const user schema will be equal to new mongoose.schema. And we want our user to have a username, and its type will be string. It has to be required. And it has to be unique. Okay. Then we want to have a field for email. So we can just copy this and paste it here. And then we want to have a field for a password. And here we can copy the type and required from here and paste it here. And also we want to know when a user was created so that we can say timestamps, it will be true. Okay, now we want to create a mongoose middleware that will run before a user document is saved to the database. So we will create a function that will automatically hash a user's password before saving it, but only if the password was added or changed. Okay, so let's write the following. Let's say user schema the name of our variable, then pre and save. Then a synchronous function and next. Okay, so what does it mean? This sets up a pre-save hook using Mongoose. Pre-save means that this function will run before a user document is saved to the MongoDB database. Then this function is asynchronous because it will use a wait inside for asynchronous operation like hashing a password. The next parameter is a callback. It tells Mongoose when this hook is done, so it can move on to the next step, which is saving the data. Okay, next, let's say the following. If it is not true, so if this is modified, and here it will be for password, then we want to return next. So this refers to the current user document which is being saved. For example, a new user which is created or a user being updated. Is modified password checks if the password field was changed or added. If the password isn't modified, so if it isn't modified, we don't want to rehash the already hashed password. So if it's not modified, we called next and exit the hook early. Okay? But if password is being modified, we want to do the following. We want to create a variable called salt, then we want to say await, and then we need to say bcrypt. But for that, we need to import bcrypt from bcrypt.js. Okay, and then we want to say generate salt, and here we want to say 10. So what does it mean? So here bcrypt.gen_salt generates a salt, which is a random string added to the password before hashing. The number 10 is the cost factor, meaning the number of routes of processing. Higher values are more secure, but slower. Await means wait for the salt to be generated before continuing. And then we just assign the result to this variable. Okay, then after that, we want to say this dot password will be equal to await bcrypt dot hash this dot password comma and salt. So what does it mean? So this line takes the original plain text password, which is this dot password, and hashes it using the generated salt. So here it is. bcrypt.hash applies a one-way encryption, which is irreversible. The result will be a long hash string which replaces the plain password in this dot password. So even if someone will get access to your database, they will not know the actual passwords. Then we want to say next. It tells Mongoose, like, we are done with the pre-save logic, you can now save the user to the database. So without next, Mongoose would hang and not continue. Okay, so we do it for safety purposes. Okay, next we want to define a custom method on the user schema, and let's call it match password. It will compare a plain text password, which will be entered by the user during login, with the hashed password stored in the database to check if they match or not. Okay, so let's do the following. Let's say user schema dot methods dot match password will be equal to a synchronous function, and here we want to have entered password. Okay, so let's understand what it does. So this adds a new method to all instances of the user model. So methods is a Mongoose feature that lets you define custom functions for each document. So the method is called match password, and it is asynchronous because it will use await inside. Okay, and here entered password means that this function takes in a plain text password which will be entered in a login form. Okay, then we want to say return await, and we want to say bcrypt.compare, and then entered password, which is entered by a user. And this dot password, which is stored in our database. So as you can see, here we have return await and so on. It means that it takes entered password, which is the plain text password typed by a user, and this dot password, the hashed password stored in the database. And then bcrypt.compare internally hashes the entered password and checks if it matches the stored hash. If they match, it returns true. If they don't match, it returns false. Okay, I think that it is clear to you, and we do it for safety purposes. And some people use hashing in routes, but I prefer to do it here so that everything is kept in one place and managed in this user.js file. I think that it's a better approach, but it's up to you. Okay, I prefer to do it this way. Okay, now let's say const user will be equal to mongoose.model user and then user schema. And to use this user model, we need to say export default and user. So let's save it. Okay, now inside backend folder, let's create one more folder called routes. Okay, inside routes folder, let's create a new file called auth.js. And here let's import Express from Express. Okay, and here let's say const router will be equal to express.router. So it's like creating a new mini Express app just for routes like register, login, and so on. Okay, so to be able to work with routes, we write the following. Now let's define a route to handle user registration. So let's say router.post, it will be a post method, and the endpoint will be, let's say, register. Okay, then we want to say asynchronous, request, and response. Then we want to destructure the following properties from our user. So let's say it will be username, email, and password. We will get access to it from request.body. So as you remember, here we have username, email, and password. And from our client, we want to take them by destructuring them. Okay, then let's use try and catch block. And do the following. If a username isn't provided, or email isn't provided, or a password isn't provided, then we want to say return response with status code of 400, meaning that it is a bad request, and with the message, which will be please fill all the fields. Okay, then if this statement isn't true and a user provides all the fields, we want to check if this user already exists. So let's create a function called, let's create a variable called user exists will be equal to await, and we want to use our user model. But here let's write .js so that we will not have any errors. And here we want to use find one method from Mongoose, and we want to look for a user with his email. Okay, so in our database among users, we will look for a user using the email that we get from request.body. And if user exists is true, then we want to do the following. So if user exists and it is true, we want to say return response with the status code of 400 and let's say JSON. And in the message, we want to say user already exists. Okay, but if a user doesn't exist, then we want to say const user will be equal to await user.create method. And here we want to provide username, email, and password. So we can copy it and put it here. And then in the response, we can say response with status code of 201, meaning that everything went successful. And in the JSON, we want to show the following data. We want to show a user's ID by saying user._ID, then his username, user.username, and for email, we can do user.email. Okay, and in case of some errors, we can say response with status code of 500, meaning that it is server error. And then we can say JSON, and in the message, we can say server error. So let's save it. And it was a route to register a user. So let's say register. So here the endpoint is register. Then we destructor username, email, and password from our client. We check if at least one of them isn't provided. We throw an error and say, please fill all the fields. Then we check if a user already exists. Then if a user exists, we throw one more error and say that user already exists. If it is not true and user doesn't exist yet, we create a new variable called user and assign to it a result of a user that we have just created. We create a new variable called user and say await user.create, and then in the response we can show the data of this user by saying user.id or username and so on. So to this variable we assign the result of this operation. So it was for registering. Now let's do for login. So let's say login, and here let's say router.post method. The endpoint will be login, and again it will be asynchronous request and response. Then we want to destructure only email and password. Let's say request.body. Again, we will take it from our user. Here we don't want to use username. We use username only when a user is registering, but we don't use it for login. Okay, here let's say try and catch block again. And we want to check if a user already exists. So we want to say const user will be equal to await user dot find one method, and we want to provide his email. Then if there is no user, or we want to say await and then user dot match password. As you remember, we have this custom method which we need to compare passwords. So this password. So we say if there is no user or the password doesn't match, then we want to say that it is invalid credentials. So if there is no user, it means that it is invalid credentials. And if a user's entered password doesn't match the password for this particular user in our database, then we want to say that it is invalid credentials. So let's say response with status code of 401.json, and for the message, let's say invalid credentials. So we can suppose that some bad user used other person's email and wrote it, right? Then by that email we found a real user, but this current user is bad with bad intentions, and then we managed to find that good user and we compare the password which is being written by a bad user. We take bad user's password and compare the password with a real password of a good user which we have in our database. So if they don't match, it means that it is invalid credentials. We can immediately see that a bad user tries to get access to the account of a good user. I think that it is clear to you. If you have some questions about it, feel free to write in the comments. But I think that it is clear. So if there is no user at all, we throw this error, and if email is correct, we just check user's password in our database with a password which is being typed in a login form. And if they don't match, we say that it is invalid credentials. Yeah, I think that is a good explanation. Okay, but then if this isn't our case and credentials are valid, we can do the following. We can say response.json, and here we can say ID will be equal to user._ID, username will be equal to user.username, and email will be equal to user.email. So if a user manages to log in, in the response we send this data. Okay, and in case, I noticed that I wrote all of this in the catch block, but I should put it here. And in case of some errors, we can say response.status with 500 code, and in the message we can say server error. Okay, I think that it is clear to you. We again take email and password from a user, then we check for a user. If there is no user or the passwords don't match, we say invalid credentials, and if everything is correct, in the response we just show the correct user ID, his username, and his email. Okay, and then we want to have one more route for me. So let's say me, and let's do the following. Let's say router.get. The endpoint will be me, and it has to be synchronous request and response. And here we want to say response.status. It will be 200, and we want to say JSON request.user. So what does it do? This route will send back the currently logged in user's info. But you may wonder, how does the server know who me is? For that, we need to use protection. So here we need to say protect, but we didn't create a middleware for that yet. So now I can just comment it out. Okay, so very soon we will create protect middleware that will check if the user sent a valid token GVT in the request. If yes, it finds the user from the database and adds it to request.user. Then the /me route can safely return that info. So without protect, this route won't know who the user is. And why do we need it? There can be a lot of use cases, for example, to display user's name, to show a profile picture or load personal data. Okay, and it can check if the token is still valid, if a token is expired or invalid. So if a token is expired or invalid, the protect middleware will reject it, and me will not return anything. So it helps validate login state. Okay, so for now, let's just say export default router, so that we will be able to use these routes. Okay, so let's save it for now. Okay, so now let's create that middleware to protect our routes. So inside this folder, inside this backend folder, I will create a new folder called middleware, and here I will create a new file called auth.js. So let's start coding. Here, first of all, let's import user model, and here let's say .js, and then let's import JWT from JSON Web Token library. So it's a library used to verify and decode JWT tokens. Then let's say export const, and our function name will be protect. It has to be synchronous, and it should have the following parameters, which will be request, response, and next. So here request means the incoming request, response is for the response object, and next is a function that tells Express to move to the next handler. Okay, here let's initialize a variable called token, but we have an error because we should write an arrow here. Okay, and then we want to check if request.headers.authorization, and we can copy it, and request.headers.authorization starts with bearer. Then we want to do the following. So if request.headers.authorization and request.headers.authorization starts with bearer, we want to say the following. So here we want to use try and catch blocks, and let's say token will be equal. But first of all, let me explain what this request headers authorization means. So here, by writing this, we want to check if there is an authorization header in the request. Its format is usually like this: authorization, but it has to be like this, then bearer, and then token. And then we want to confirm that the header starts with bearer. Okay, so that's why we need to check it. So if request.headers.authorization is true itself, and then if it starts with bearer, we want to do the following. We want to extract the token. So we need to say request.headers.authorization.split, and here we want to split with some space, and we want to take not the first but the second argument. So index at 0 is the word bearer itself, and index at 1 will be the actual token. Okay, so we assign the actual token to this variable which we initialized here. Okay, then let's create a variable called decoded will be equal to jwt.verify our token, and then our process.env.jwt secret variable, which we don't have yet. So first of all, let me create that variable, and then I will explain what it does. So in our .env file, let's create this variable, and for the sake of this tutorial, I will just write 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. But in real world, for real world projects, you shouldn't do it like that. Okay, so let's save it. And here, what does it do? So here, jwt.verify checks if the token is valid. It uses a secret key, which is jwt secret, to verify that the token wasn't tampered with. If it is valid, it decodes the token and returns an object with the user data. Okay, then we want to say request.user will be equal to await, then our user model, and here we want to say find by ID, then decoded dot ID, and we want to select all users data except his password, so we want to say minus password. Okay, so here await user dot find by ID decoded dot ID uses the ID from the decoded token to find the user in MongoDB. Select minus password tells MongoDB to exclude the password field when returning the user. So now the request object has the user, his ID, his username, email, and so on. So this user info can be used in protected routes. Okay, then we want to say return next middleware. So here we say return next. It means that everything went fine, so we call next to continue to the next route handler. Okay, and in case of some errors, we can say the following. We can say console.error, and here we can say token verification failed, and we can provide error.message. Okay, and we can return response with status code of 401, and in the JSON, in the message, we can say message, and let's say not authorized, token failed. Okay, and then if request.headers.authorization and this isn't true, we can say return. We can basically copy this and put it here. Okay, so let's save it. And now we can protect our routes. So here we can use this me, but first of all, let's import protect function. Here it is. And we will protect some of our routes in nodes when we create it. Okay, and now of course we need to generate JWT tokens, because without them we will not be able to protect our routes, and without them we will not be able to verify anyone. Okay, so let's create a function called generate JWT. Okay, so let's say const generate token. This function will accept one argument, which will be ID, and then we want to say return jwt.sign, and here we want to use this ID. Then we want to use process.env.jwt secret, our variable, and we want to say that it expires in 30 days. Okay, so what does it do? So here we define a function called generate token. It takes one argument, ID. It is user's unique ID from MongoDB. Okay, we created this function so that it will return a JWT token that contains this user ID. So here we say jwt.sign, and this is the main line that creates signs or the token, and this ID is the payload, the data we want to store inside the token. In this case, it stores the user's ID. Later, when someone sends the token back to your server, you'll be able to decode it and know who they are. Then this is the secret key used to sign the token. It's like a password only your server knows. Okay, and then we say expires. It means that the token will expire in 30 days. After that, the user must log in again to get a new token. And then this function will return the token as a string. Okay, now we need to use this generate token, and we want to generate token every time someone registers or logins. So let's use this function. So let's copy it, and here when we register a user, here we want to create a variable called token and say generate token will be equal to user dot underscore ID, and then we want to return the token here. Okay, so in this function we send user's ID from MongoDB database. Okay, as you can see, and then in the response we want to show this token. Then when someone logins, we can also do it. So here we can do the following and we can return it like this. Okay. Oh, and I also noticed that here I forgot to write return. Okay, and looks like everything is good here. So let's save this file. Now we can control and verify users, and we can protect our routes. Now we can try register and login users in Postman, but before that we need to make some changes in our server.js. Okay, first of all, here let's say app.use express.json. So this line tells your Express server to automatically parse incoming JSON data in the body of HTTP requests. Why we need it? So when we send data from the frontend to the backend in a login or registration form, it's sent as JSON. Without this line, request.body will be undefined and we will not be able to access the data. So for example, a client may send something like this, email, and then user@gmail.com and password. So it will be like this. So thanks to express.json, we will be able now access it in the routes. We will be able to access it. Okay, I think that it is clear to you, because without writing this, we will not be able to access the data which is sent from frontend to backend. And now we can remove this completely. Okay, and now to actually use our routes, we can say app.use, and then let's say that it will be at API users, and then auth routes. So let's import auth routes from routes and auth.js. So this line registers user-related routes like /register, /login, and so on under the API/users. Okay, so as you remember, here we have routes like register, /login, and then they will be accessible like this. Okay, we just created this like prefix, and then if we need register, we will refer like this. If we need login, we will refer like this. Okay, I think that it's clear. So it helps to organize our routes in a clean and modular way. Instead of putting everything in one place, we separate logic into different files. And for example, register will be accessible like this, as I said. Okay. So now I will save this file, and now let's test our routes, our auth routes in Postman. Okay, if you are new to Postman, first of all, let's click this plus button to create new collection. Then let's say blank collection, and we can rename it. So let's say it will be MERN nodes app. Okay, then let's click add request. It will be post in our case. Then let's click body raw, and we need to provide the correct path. It will be HTTP. It will be HTTP / localhost 5000 API users and register. Okay, so now we need to provide username. Let's say Robert. Then we need to provide email. Let's say robert@gmail.com. And password. Let's say 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. So now let's click send. And as you can see, we have internal server error. Let's find out why we have this error. Well, I think that the error is because the closing parenthesis should be here. Okay, so let's save it. And now in Postman, I will create an absolutely new user. I will say Mike. And let's try one more time. We still have that error. Oh, I get it. The error is because I didn't import JWT from JSON Web Token. Okay. So now let's save the file and try one more time. Here I will say Nick. And as you can see, user was created. So it just proves one more time that we need to be very careful when we code, but everyone makes mistakes. Okay, so we registered a user whose username is Nick and whose email is nick@gmail.com, and here you can see his ID and token. Now let's try to log in with this data. So here I will say login, and I don't need his username, so I will remove it and I will click send. And as you can see, we managed to log in. We still have the right credentials and we managed to log in. Okay, so now let's get back to the code. And you may want to see our users in our database. So let's check it. Let's see it. Here I will just refresh the page. And as you can see, here we have our nodes database. Its name is nodes. And here we have users collections and we have our users. Okay. Okay. Now before going to create nodes, routes, first of all, let's open node model. And here, as you remember, I said that later we will have one more field. So let's create that field. It will be created by. And now we want to say type will be equal to mongoose.schema.types.object_id. And we want to refer to our user model. And it has to be required, so it will be true. So now, since we know and since we verify users, we have protection, we have tokens, we can know by whom a node was created. So by doing this, we will be able to identify a user who created a certain node. Okay, now inside routes, let's create nodes.js file. Okay, here let's import Express from Express. Then let's import node from models node.js. And let's import protect function because we want to protect our routes. Now again, let's say router will be equal to express.router as we did in auth.js routes. So here let's say get nodes, and here let's say router.get. It will be the root path of nodes, and we want it to be protected. Then it has to be asynchronous, request and response. Then we want to say try and catch block. And we want to say const nodes will be equal to await node.find method, and we want to find it by created by field, and here we want to say request.user._id. So we want to find all the nodes associated with a certain user, and we can say request.user._id. Why? Because in our middleware we have this request.user. So we assign the result of this to this request.user, and then request.user has an ID, and using this ID we want to find all the nodes of a user. Okay, so that each user will be able to see only his own nodes. Okay, and then we want to say response JSON, and we want to show nodes. In case of some error, we can say console.error get all nodes error, and here let's say error. It has to be like this. And also we can say response.status with code of 500, and we can say JSON, and in the message we can say server error. Okay, now we have one route to get all the nodes. Now let's create a route to create a node. So let's say create a node. Let's say router dot post, and it will be the root path of nodes. We want it to be protected, and here we need to say asynchronous request and response, and we want to get access to the title and description from request.body. Okay, then we want to use try and catch block, and here we want to say if a title isn't provided or a description isn't provided, we want to say the following. We want to return response with status code of 400, meaning that it is bad request, and in the JSON we want to show the message please fill all the fields. Okay, but if title and description are provided, then we want to say const node will be equal to await our model dot create, and our title, our description, and created by, which will be equal to request.user._id. In case of some errors, we can just copy it and put it here. Okay, so now we have a route to create a node. We just get access to the title and description from our client. If at least one of them isn't provided, we show that he needs to fill all the fields. Then we create a variable and say that we want to create a node, and then of course we can say response.status 201, and we can say JSON and the node that was created. Okay, so now we have get all the nodes, create a node, and now we want to have a route to get a single node. For that we can say router.get, and it will be like ID. So it's a dynamic parameter. It means that our path will be like this. As you can see, we have localhost 5000 API nodes and then this ID. But when it comes to creating a node or getting nodes, we don't need this part. It will be only like this. But when we need a specific node, it will be like this, and it is representing ID. Okay. So let's continue. And we want it to be protected as well. It has to be synchronous, request and response. And then we want to say try and catch. And here, let's say const node will be equal to await node.find by ID. And here we want to say request.params.id. We will get this ID from our client. So as you can see, we have request.params.id. We will get it from our client and you will understand it better as we keep going. So we will send this ID from frontend to backend, and then on backend we will look for it in our database. Okay, here we created a variable and then we try to look for it in a database, and if there is no node, then we want to say return response with status 404, meaning that it is not found. And for the message, we can say node not found. Okay, and in case of some errors, we can copy it and put it here. Now we have a route to get a single node. Okay, now let's create a route to update a node. It will be put. And again, we need this dynamic ID. Then again, we need to get access to the title and description. So we can write it like that. And then let's say try and catch. And again, we want to look for a node. If we can't find a node, we say that node not found. And then we can write the following, but I think that it's unnecessary because we already handle protection very well. But I think that we can show it. So we can imitate a situation when a user will try to update a node which doesn't belong to him, but it's impossible in our case. But anyway, I will try to handle it. So let's say if node created by, and let's say that we want to make it to be a string. So if node created by is not equal to request.user._id to string, then we want to say return response.status with 401, and in the JSON we want to say message, and let's say that not authorized. Okay, so in this case we just compare one ID with the other one, and if they don't match, we return the message which says not authorized. But then if title and description are provided, we want to say the following. We want to say node.title will be equal to title or node.title, and the same for description. So if a title or description are provided, we change them, we update them. But if only title is provided and description isn't provided, we leave description as it was and update only title. And if description is provided and title isn't provided, we update only description and leave title as it was. Okay, now let's create a variable called updated code. And here let's say await node.save. And here let's say response.json and updated code. In case of some errors, we can show this. Okay, now we need the final route to delete a node. So let's do it. So let's say router.delete. Again, here we need to have /: and ID. Then we want to protect it, and it has to be request and response. Then we can copy this and put it here, but it has to be inside try and catch. Okay. So everything here is the same as when it comes to updating. And then if everything is fine and we really go to the point when we want to delete it, we say await node.delete one. And in the response, we can say response.json. And in the message, we can say node was deleted. And in case of some errors, we can show this error. Okay. And now let's say export default router. So let's save it. And in server.js, we want to use our routes here. So let's say app.use. Let's say app.use API nodes. And here we want to say nodes routes. Okay. So let's import nodes routes from routes nodes.js. So now we can try to create a node in Postman. Okay, so let's try to do it. So here we need to say API nodes, then we can leave it as it is, and let's get back to the code quickly. So if I leave it as it is, I can create a node because we have this slash. Okay, let's try to do it. Okay, and now let's create a node here. But before, I need to take this token and do the following. So inside this headers tab, I need to say the following. I need to say authorization, then bearer, and this token. And in the body, now we need to say title and description. And here let's say test 1, and let's say test 2. And here we need to say nodes. As you can see, we managed to create a node. So let's see it in our database. So let's refresh it. And inside nodes, we have one node. Okay, so I think that's it. If you want to keep testing in Postman, you can do it. But now I suggest going to do frontend. Okay, so let's do it. So as I said, everything related to frontend should be installed inside frontend folder. So let's do it. So let's go to the frontend folder. And here let's say npm create vid at latest. And I will write dot so that everything will be installed inside this folder. Here let's choose React, then JavaScript, and let's say npm install. Okay, it's time to connect Tailwind CSS to a project, so let's visit their website. So here let's click get started. Since we use vid, we're in the right place, so let's copy this command and paste it in our terminal. Okay, now let's copy this, and inside vid.config.js file, we need to make some changes. So let's paste it here, and inside plugins array next to React, let's write Tailwind CSS and save this file. Now let's copy this, and inside index.css, we can remove everything here and put it here. Okay, that's it. Now before saying npm run dev, let's install Axios to make HTTP requests from frontend to Backend and React router DOM to navigate between pages. So let's press enter, and now we can say npm run dev. So let's open it, and here we go. I will split my screen so that you'll be able to see everything better. So here we can delete this app.css, and inside app.js, and inside app.js we can remove everything here. Here we can create a div. Let's say hello for now, and remove it here. Let's save it, and to reset the styles we need to refresh the page, and inside index.html we can say MERN, let's say MERN nodes app. So let's save it, and here it is. We can close this one. Okay, so let's close the tabs that we don't need. Okay, so now inside this source folder, let's create a new folder called components, and inside let's create navbar.jsx. Okay, and here let's create a layout for our navbar. Let's say nav. It will be correct to use this nav. And here let's say that background color will be gray 900, and padding will be 4, but we will not see it because we need to use it inside app.js. So let's import navbar and save it. Okay, and for now let's say that text will be white, but there is no text, right? Let's add some text. Let's say logo. Okay, here it is. Let's add some shadow, which will be large. Then inside this nav, let's create a div. Okay, and let's apply the following styles to it. Let's say that it will be container, and if we hover over, you can see all the beauty of Tailwind CSS. Okay, then let's say that margin left and margin right will be auto, so that everything will be centered. Let's say that flex display will be flex, items will be center, and justify will be between. So inside this div, we can create a link, and this link comes from React router DOM. So let's import link from React router DOM. Here it is. Let's say that it will go to the home page whenever we click this logo. And here we want to say nodes app. So let's save it. And we have an error, as you can see, as it is now, and so on. And it is because we need to make some changes in our main.js. We need to wrap it in browser router. Otherwise, we will not be able to use navigation, routes, links, and so on. So here, let's say browser router. And let's put it here. Okay. And as you can see, now we have our nodes app. So let's continue. Also, here we want to have username and a button to log out. So let's say the following. If there is a user that will come to this navbar from app.js, for that, here we need to create a state called user, set user, and by default it will be null. So we want to take this user and pass it here, so this navbar can get access to it. And if there is a user, we want to do the following. So let's use fragment here, and here let's say div, and here using a span tag we would like to show username. Okay, so let's save it. And now we don't see anything because user is not true. And also we would like to have a button to handle logout. Okay, we will come to it a bit later. Now let's focus on app.js. Here we can do the following. We already have navbar here, okay, and let's add some styles to this div. Let's say that min height will be screen and background color will be gray 500. So let's save it, and now it is darker. Let's define routes, and here we can create a route which will lead to a login page. And then what we want to show, it will depend on whether user is true or not. So if a user is true, we want to say navigate to the home page. Otherwise, we want to show the following. We want to create this login. We want to show this login component, okay? And the same will be for registering. Here, let's say register and register. So let's import routes from React Router DOM and route from React Router DOM. Okay, so let's save it. And as you can see, we have an error. It is because login is not defined and register is not defined. So first of all, let's create components called register and login. Okay, and let's import them and register. Okay, and we need one more route, and it means that we need one more component. So here let's create home.jsx component. Okay, and here let's create one more route. So its path will be the home page and the element will be the following. So if user is true, then we want to show this home page component, but if it's not, we want to navigate to a login page. Okay, so let's save it. And as you can see, now we are in the login page. So let's take care of login. So here we want to create a login form. For that, let's create several states. Let's say email, set email will be equal to use state, and by default it will be an empty string. Then let's create one more for password and set password. Okay, and in case of some errors, we need a state for that as well. And also, after a successful signing in, we want to navigate to the home page. So we can say navigate will be equal to use navigate, which comes from React Router DOM. Okay, so let's create a layout. For that, we can create, let's say h2 tag, and let's say login. Okay, and now let's add some styles. Let's say that it will be container, margin left and right will be auto, and max width will be 448 pixels. Let's say that margin top will be 10 and padding will be 6, and background color will be white, and rounded will be large. And let's add some shadow. Okay, to this h2 tag, let's add the following styles. Let's say that Text will be 2XL. Font will be semi-bold. Okay. And let's say that margin bottom will be 6. And text will be center. Okay. And in case of some errors, we want to show an error if error is true. And using a p tag, we can show an actual error. And let's add some styles to it. Let's say that text will be red, 500, margin bottom will be 4, text will be center. Okay, now let's create a form. And let's say that inside we want to have a div. And then we want to have input, type will be text, type will be email, and value will be email. And on change, we want to get access to this event object and say set email event.target.value. So whatever we type will be set to this email. And for the placeholder, let's say that it will be email. So let's save it. Here it is. So let's add some styles to it. Let's say that width will be full. Padding horizontally will be 3. Vertically will be 2. And let's add some border. Let's say that it will be rounded, medium. We want to say that outline will be none. So let's save it. Okay. Then what we want to do next is say when there is focus, we want it to be 2. And we want the color of the ring to be blue 400. So here it is. Okay. And we want it to be required. And let's copy it. And do the same for password. Okay, actually it has to be inside of a separate div. Okay. And then let's create a button. Let's say that it will be login. And let's add some styles to it. Let's say that width will be full. Background color will be blue 500. Text will be white. Padding vertically will be 2. And it will be rounded, medium. And on hover, we want background color to be blue 700. Okay, so let's save it. Here it is. So now when we try to click this button, as you can see, we have this, please fill out this field. And then under this form, we can create a p tag and say the following. Let's say don't have an account. And if a user doesn't have an account, then we want to provide a link to a register page. Okay, so let's save it. We have an error because we didn't import link. Okay, here it is. Now if we click register, we are in the register page. So let's add some styles. First of all, let's add some space here. Okay, and to this p tag, let's say that margin top will be 4 and text will be center. And to this link, we can add the following styles. We can say that text will be blue 600, and on hover, let's make it to be underline. Okay, and let's add some space space to this form, we can say that it will be space vertically, which will be 4. Now it looks much better. Okay, now we want to log in. For that, we need to create a function called handle submit. Here we can get access to the event object to prevent the default behavior. So let's see, event.prevent default. Okay, and here let's say try prevent default behavior. I mean to prevent the form from reloading the page. Okay, now let's say try, and here we can say const, and we can immediately say data will be equal to await Axios dot post, and here we can see API users and login. First of all, let's import Axios from Axios. And right now this path will not work. So inside vid.config.js, we need to do the following. We need to say server proxy. And then we need to say, and then let's say API target. And here we want to say HTTP localhost 5000. So every single time when we write API, this will be in front of it like a prefix. Okay. So now this will work. You may wonder why we write data like this. Here, by doing this, we immediately destructure data from the response. Instead of constantly writing response.data, we can do it like this. Okay. Now let's do the following. Let's say that we want to provide here email and password. And then we want to say the following. We want to say local storage dot set item. Here, let's say token. And we want to store our token that we will get from data. Why? Because it's easy for us to control whether a user is still logged in even after refreshing the page. So here we store the token in local storage so that user stays logged in even after refreshing the page or coming back later. Okay. Then ideally we want to accept set user from app.jsx. So let's do it. Here we need to pass it to the login. Here it is. Okay, so let's save it. And if everything is successful, then we want to say set user. Let's say set user to be this data. And then we want to navigate to the home page. Okay. In case of some errors, we can say error, and let's say set error dot response dot data dot message or server error. Here we have an error because it has to be synchronous. And let's take this function, and when we submit this form, on submit, we want to call this function. So let's save it. Okay, I don't know why we have this. We need to remove it. Okay, so now let's try to log in using the wrong credentials. So I will say frank@gmail.com and password. So let's click login. And now we have invalid credentials. Now let's try to log in as Mike. And now we are in the home page, but we have an error because home is not defined. So let's import home. Okay. So let's try one more time. I will say Mike gmail.com. Okay, and now as you can see, we are in the home page. Okay, and in our navbar we see this username and logout. But as you can see, when we refresh the page, everything is reset. We will handle it very soon. Now let's try to create a form for registering. Okay, so it will be almost the same as login. So let's copy it and paste it here. Here we need to say register. And the same should be done here. And register. Don't have an account, but here we should say already have an account. Then we should say login. And we should redirect to the login page. So here it is. Here we should also say register, and we need to have one more field for username. So let's create. And we need to make sure that we really pass this set user property to this register. So let's copy it and put it here. Okay. Here we need to create one more div for username. Let's say username. So let's save it. Okay. And here it has to be register and username. Okay, we have an error because I forgot to write a comma. Now, if we have an account, we can log in. If we don't have an account, we can register. Okay, so now let's go to the Notes app. Let's go to the home page. But we can't go there. So let's take care of that. In the app.js, we can do the following. We can use useEffect hook and do the following. We can create a function called fetch user, and it has to be asynchronous. And then let's say try and catch block. So let's say const token will be equal to local storage dot get item and the name, which is token. If token is not true, we want to say, so if token is not true, we just want to return. Okay, so let's say const data will be equal to await Axios dot get, then API users dot slash me, and here we should provide headers, as you remember, then authorization, and here we need to say bearer and our token. But we need to import Axios from Axios. Okay, so here token should be true because I logged in and it has to be saved in local storage. Now we want to get current user data. So we do this, and then we want to say set user to be equal to this data that we get. And if there is an error, we can say local storage dot remove item and then token. So let's call this function And when it comes to the dependencies array, it has to be empty so that every time this component mounts, this function will be called. So now set data should be true. Okay, so let's save it. And as you can see, we have mic and logout. And now even if I refresh, we still see mic and logout, even though for a second we saw that login form. As you remember previously, when I refreshed, we saw only login form. But now we see this mic and logout. Okay, it is because here we control if user is true, we either navigate to the home page or show this login. So this is how it works. And now if I refresh for a moment, we see this login. If you don't want to see that, and I also don't want to see that, we can create one more state called loading, set loading, and let's say that use state, and by default loading will be true. Then we can say if loading is true, then we want to return the following. We want to return a div, and let's apply some styles to it. Let's say that it will be min height will be screen, background color will be gray 900, it has to be flex, items will be center, and justify will be center. And then inside we want to have one more div, and here we can say loading and dots. And let's apply some styles to it. Let's say that text will be Excel and text will be white. And there has to be a moment when we need to make loading to be false. So after try catch, we can say finally, and we can say set loading to be false. So let's save it. And as you can see, instead of that form, we see loading. I think that it's a better experience. Okay, let's add some styles to our navbar component. Okay, so here to this div we can say flex, items will be center, and let's add some space. Okay, for the username let's add the following styles. Let's say that text will be gray 300 and font will be medium. When it comes to this button, we can say background color will be red 600, text will be white, and padding horizontally will be 3, vertically it will be 1, and let's say that it will be rounded medium. On hover, we want to say background color to be a bit darker, it will be 700, so let's save it. Okay, and now we need to handle functionality for a case when a user really wants to log out. So let's create a function called handle logout. Okay, and here when a user tries to log out, we need to say local storage remove item and say token. And then we want to say set user to be null. And we want to navigate to the login page. Here we need to say const navigate will be equal to use navigate. And let's replace it with this one. Okay, so we need to use this function when a user clicks this button. So let's say on click, we want to call this function. So let's save it. Now when I click logout, we have an error for some reason. Well, after refreshing, the error was gone. Let's try one more time. Let's say Robert. Now I am logged in and I can refresh the page. So let's click logout. I have only user, but I should have set user. Okay. So let's say that we want to pass this set user to the navbar. Okay. So here we go. Here we want to see set user. So let's try one more time, and it happened immediately. So let's try one more time. And we can log out. Okay, now I will log in as Robert again. Okay, now we need to show our nodes, and then we need to create functionality for updating, deleting, and creating them. Okay, now let's take care of the home component. Here we want to show all the nodes which are related to this user. Okay, so let's create some states. Let's say nodes, set nodes will be equal to this empty array. And we want to create one more state for errors. So let's say use state. And by default, it will be an empty string. Okay, so let's create a function called fetch nodes. It will be asynchronous. And let's say try and catch. Okay, and here we need to say const token will be equal to local storage dot get item and token. If there is no token, we want to say the following. Let's say set error no authentication token found. Please log in. And we just want to return. Okay, but if we have a token, we can say the following. We can say data will be equal to await Axios dot get API nodes. And in headers, we want to provide the following. We want to say authorization. And here we want to say bearer and our token. But we need to use backsticks. Okay, let's import Axios from Axios. And then we want to say set nodes to be equal to data. In case of some errors, we can just say set error failed to fetch nodes. And we want to call this function every single time our component mounts. Okay, so let's save it. And let's say that we want to console log nodes. And let's see what we have. And we can say console log data here as well. So let's open our console. And we have an array which is empty. Maybe it is because Robert hasn't created even one node. So I will create some nodes for Robert in Postman. Okay, so here, first of all, let's log in as Robert. I will say login, and it has to be email and password. So here we need to say robert@gmail.com, and password has to be this. So let's click send. So we are logged in as Robert. Now in headers, I need to replace this key with this one. I mean, I need to replace this token with this one. And now in body, let's write here title and description. Here let's write test1 and test2. So let's click button, let's click send, but before we need to say API nodes. So let's click it, and it is successful. Now let's check it in our frontend. I will open our console and I will refresh the page. And as you can see, here we have a node of Robert. That's great. Okay, now we want to display all the nodes on the page. So let's do it. So for that, first of all, here, let's create the following. Let's do the following. Here, I want to say container. Margin left and margin right will be auto. Padding horizontally will be 4. Vertically, it will be 8. Min height will be screen. And background color will be gray 500. So let's save it. Okay, and also, if we have some errors, we can show them. So if error is true, we want to show it here. Let's add some styles. Let's say that text will be red 400 and margin bottom will be 4. And here actually we want to show error. Okay, and here under this error, we can create a div. And here we can say nodes.map, and here we can say node and a div. Each div should have a unique key. Since each node has its own ID, we can use it. And we can create h3 tag and say node.title. Then we can say node.description. And also the time when it was created or updated. So we can say new date node.updated at to locate string. So let's save it. And here we go. Here we have our first node. Also, we would like to have 2 buttons. One of them for deleting and one of them for editing. So let's save it. Okay, now let's add some styles. So to this div, we can add the following styles. Let's say that background color will be gray 800, padding will be 4, rounded will be large, and shadow will be medium. To this h3 tag, we can say that text will be large, font will be medium, and text will be white. And also margin bottom will be 2. So let's save it and see what we have. Okay, looks good. To this description, we can add the following styles. We can say that text will be gray 300 and margin bottom will be 4. Okay, to this next p tag, we can say that text will be small and text color will be gray 400 and margin bottom will be 4. Okay, let's style these buttons. Let's say that for this edit, let's say that background color will be yellow 600, text will be white, padding horizontally will be 3, vertically it will be 1, it will be rounded, medium, and on hover we want background color to be yellow 700. So let's save it. Okay, we can copy these styles and apply it to this button, but change the color to be red. Okay, and to this div, we can see that it will be flex, and we can see that the space between them will be 2. Okay, it looks good, but one node shouldn't take the whole width. Okay, now in Postman, I will create a few more nodes so that it will be easier for us to work with our nodes. Okay, so let's say that we want to say it will be test 3 and test 4. And here we want to say it will be test 5 and test 6. And so on. Okay, now I will refresh the page. And as you can see, we have a lot of nodes. So now to make the layout better, we can come to this div and say the following. Let's say that we want to use grid, and grid calls on smaller screens will be 1, on medium screens it will be 2, and on large screens it will be 3, and some space between the nodes. Okay, now everything looks great. Now we need to make functionality for deleting, editing, and creating a node. Later, here we will have a field where a user can search for nodes that he needs. Okay, now let's handle deleting. For that, I will create a new function called handle delete. It has to be asynchronous and it will accept an ID. Then we want to use try and catch. And we want to check if there is a token or not. Then we want to say await Axios dot delete method, and we need to provide the correct path. We need to say API, nodes, and the ID. And of course, we need to provide headers authorization bearer token, so we can copy it and put it here. Okay, after deleting on backend, we should update our frontend too. So let's say set nodes, nodes.filter, and here we want to filter out the node which was deleted. We need to do it by comparing their IDs. So here we want to update our frontend and show the nodes whose ID isn't equal to this incoming ID. So we filter all our nodes and then we look for this. So if node._ID isn't equal to this ID, then the node should be in frontend, should be shown in frontend. So here, by doing this set nodes, nodes.filter node, and so on, we make sure that we will keep only the nodes which is IDs are not equal to this incoming ID. And if a certain node here has the same ID which is equal to this one, we will get rid of it. I think that you get it. And in case of some error, we want to do the following. We want to say set error failed to delete node. So let's save it. Let's copy this function, and we want to use it when we click this button. And here we will pass an ID. Okay, and we can copy it. So let's save it, and let's try to delete, for example, this one, test 3 and test 4. and it is gone on the front end. So let's try to refresh the page. And yes, that node is gone. Okay, now let's create a functionality to create a node. For that, we can create a button which will always be fixed and which will be in this area in the bottom right corner. So let's create a button for that. We can create that button under this error. Okay, so let's create a button. And here let's create a span and it will be plus. So let's add some styles to this button. Let's say that it will be fixed. Bottom will be 6 and right will be 6. Let's say that width will be 14 and height will be 14. Background color will be gray 800. And let's say that text will be white and text will be 3XL. And then let's say that it will be rounded. It will be completely rounded. Let's add some shadow, which will be large. And on hover, let's say that it will be gray 900. Okay, then let's say that it will be flex. Items will be center. And justify will be center. So let's see what we have. Here it is. And the plus button, the plus itself isn't centered perfectly. So to handle that, to this span, we can add the following styles. We can say that it will be flex, items will be center, justify will be center, height will be full, and width will be full. So let's save it. And it is still not what we want, so we can add some padding bottom. So let's do it. And I think that now it looks good. So now when we click this button, we should see a model, a pop-up model. Okay, here let's create a new component called node model.jsx. Okay, so now let's try to add some styles to it. Let's say that it will be fixed. And let's say that inset will be at 0. Background color will be black with some opacity. Let's say that flex and items center. And also justify will be center. And z will be 50, so that it will be on top of almost every element in our application. Then let's say h2 tag, and for now, let's say that it will be create node, but we will also use this node model for edit nodes. Okay, let's add some styles. Let's say that it will be text to XL, font will be semi-bold, text will be white, and margin bottom will be 4. Then if we have some error, we can show it here. So if there is an error, we can show it here. So let's say that we want to have some class name, text will be red 400, and margin bottom will be 4, and here we want to show error. Then here let's create some states. Let's say title, set title, it will be use state, it will be an empty string. Then let's say description, set description. Let's say error, set error. Okay, so for now let's save it, and in our home.jsx we can do the following. And here under this error we can show this node model component, and here we can send to this node model component some properties. First of all, let's create a state to control if model is open. So let's say is model open, set is model open, and by default it will be false. Also, let's create a state for whether a node is being edited or not. So let's say edit node, set edit node, and it will be null by default. Now we can create a function called handle edit. So let's do it. So let's say handle edit, and it will accept a node. Then we want to say set edit node to be the node which is passed to this function, and set is model open to be true. Okay, so let's use this function. Here, when we click this button, we want to say that to this function we want to pass the whole node. Okay, and as you can see, here we have create node. It is from this. Yes. Okay, let's keep going. So to this node model, we can now pass the following properties: is open to be equal to is model open. Then on close, we want to do the following. We want to set is model open to be false, and then set edit node to be null. And node will be equal to edit node, but it should be outside. It has to be not here, but here. So let's save it. Okay. And also we can create one more property, and we can say onSave. We can say onSave and handle save node, but we don't have this function yet. So let's create. So here, let's say const handle save node. Here we want to say new node, and we want to say the following: if edit node is true, so if it is the node which we are editing, then we want to say set nodes nodes.map. Here we can say node, and if node._id is equal to this new node._id, then we want to replace this node with this new node. If not, we want to leave it as it is. So if we are really editing a node, then we check if node._id is equal to this new node. So if it is true, if a current node._id is equal to this one, then we want to update it with this new node. If not, we just want to leave it as it is. Okay, but if we're not editing, if we just want to create one, we want to say set nodes, and here we want to keep all the nodes that we already have and add a new node to them. That's it. So let's save it. Okay, then we want to say set edit node to be null, and set is model open to be false. Okay, now we can pass it here. Okay, so now inside node model, let's accept them. So here let's say is open, then on close node, and on save. Okay, and here inside this node model, we want to have one use effect. So let's say use effect, and we want to do the following. We want to say set title, and if node is true, then we want to say it will be node.title. If not, we want it to be empty. So if, for example, node is true, it means that we are editing it, and then we want it to be equal to node.title. But if we are just creating, if we want to create, of course it will be empty. But if we want to edit a node, then of course we want to have some data already to be written there. For example, when I click this edit, I want my title already to be test1 and my description to be test2. But if I'm not editing, and if I just want to create by clicking this button, of course it has to be empty. So that's why if there is a node, it means that we want to edit it and its title will be equal to node.title. If not, it will be empty because we just want to create one, not edit the existing one. And the same will be with description. So if there is node, we want to see node description. If not, it will be empty. And then we can reset the error to be empty string. And of course, this use effect should depend on a node. Okay, so let's save it. So now let's take care of the layout. So here we can do the following. If node is true, then we want to show edit node. If it is not true, we want to show create node. So let's save it. As you can see, now we have create node because edit node is not true. Okay, now we can wrap these two in a div. And to this div, we can add the following styles. We can say that background color will be gray 800, padding will be 6, rounded will be large, and let's add some shadow, which will be XL. Width will be full, but max width will be MD. So let's save it. Okay, here it is. Now we can create a form. So under this error, we can create a form. Inside this form, we can create a div. And here we can create input. Its type will be text. And the value will be title. And on change, we want to get access to this event object and then say set title to be equal to what we type. For the placeholder, we can say node title and we can add some styles. Let's say that it will be width will be full, padding horizontally will be 3, vertically it will be 2, background color will be gray 700, text will be white. Let's say that we will have some border color will be gray 600, it will be rounded medium, outline will be none. And let's say we will have focus. When we have focus, ring will be 2, and when we have focus, ring color will be blue 500. Here we go. Here we can do almost the same for the description. Here we need to say description, but in this case, we will have text area instead of inputs, and let's say that rows will be 4 and it will be required the same as this input, which will also be required. So let's save it. And now we have description and title. Now to this form, we can add some space. Let's say that it will be space 4. Under this div, we can create one more div. And here we can have button. And if node is true, we want to show update. If node isn't true, we want to say create. Here it is. So let's add some styles to this div. Let's say that it will be flex and we will have some space, which will be 2. And to this button, we can add the following styles. Let's say background color will be blue 600. Text will be white. Padding horizontally will be 4. Vertically will be 2. Rounded will be medium. And on hover, we want background color to be blue 700. So let's save it. And this button's type has to be submit. And we can create one more button. And this button will be for canceling cancel. And its type will be button. And the color here will be gray. So let's save it. Here it is. Now we can create a function called handle submit. So let's do it. Let's say handle submit. It has to be asynchronous. and then we want to prevent the default behavior of a page. I have already mentioned that. Then we want to use try and catch block, and we can check if token exists or not. We can take it from here and put it here. Then we can do the following. We can create a payload like this. We can say that it will be equal to title and description. And then for config, we can do the following. We can say it will be equal to headers and authorization and bearer with token. Okay, then if node is true, we want to say const data will be equal to await Axios dot put. So if node is true, it means that we are editing it, so that's why we say put. Then we need to provide the correct path, so we say API nodes, then its ID node._id, and then payload and config. And then we want to call our function called onSave and pass here data. Else, if node isn't true, we want to say const data will be equal to await Axios.post. Here we also need to provide the path, API and nodes, then payload and config. And also we should call this onSave data. And after that we can reset title to be empty. The same will be for description. The same will be for error. And we want to close our model. In case of some errors, we can say console.error. Let's say node save error. And also we can say set error to be equal to failed to save error. So when it comes to this onSave, as you remember, in our home we have this function called handle save node. We pass it here, as you remember. So here we define if it is being edited or being created, and based on that we update our front end. So now let's save it and let's take this function, and we want to use it when we submit our form. So let's call it here. Okay, so now let's refresh the page, for example, and now let's try to create a new node. So let's try to do it. I will write something like this and something like this. So let's click create, and we have an error. We have node save error. Okay, we have our error because I forgot to import Axios from Axios. So let's import it and try one more time. And looks like we have a node, but this model isn't gone. Yes, we have created a node, but this model isn't gone. We can do the following. We can say if is open, not true. We can say return null. So it should solve our problem because here we control it. When we save it, we say that set is model open to be false. So let's try to edit it. Let's add something like this. And looks like everything is correct. Let's try to add one more time. But when I click this button, I don't see a pop-up model. So let's try to fix it. So it is in our home. And when we click this button, we need to say that on click, we want to say set is model open to be true. So let's save it and try one more time. Okay, let's try to add a new node. And it is here. Let's try to delete this one. Let's try to refresh the page. Okay, looks like everything is correct. I really like doing it. Now here in navbar we can put some search filter. So a user can type what he is looking for, and based on that he will see the nodes. Okay, now in navbar we can do the following. So we can first of all create a state for search. So let's say search, set search to be equal to use state, and by default it will be an empty string. Then we want to show an input only if a user is logged in. So if user is true, only then we want to show it. So for that we can create a div, and here we can have input, its type will be text, value will be search, and on change we can get access to this event object and say set search to be equal to what we type in the input. Okay, for the placeholder we can say search nodes. Okay, so let's save it, and here it is. So let's add some styles to it. Let's say that width will be full, padding horizontally will be 4, vertically it will be 2, background color will be gray 700, and text will be white. Let's add some border color will be gray 600. Let's say that it will be rounded medium, and outline will be none. And then we can do it again. So when it is focused, green will be 2, and when it is focused, green color will be blue 500. So here it is. Okay, we can type something, and based on that we should see the nodes. So let's create functionality for that. For that we need to use useEffect. So let's say useEffect. Our useEffects will depend on search state, on navigate, and user. So if there is no user, we want to return, so it means that nothing will happen. But if there is a user, then we want to create a variable called delay, which will be equal to set timeout function. Okay. And then we want to say navigate search dot trim. It means that we will remove the leading and trailing white space and light terminator characters from a string. It's very useful, as you can see, you can read it. Okay, so if search is true, we want to show something like this. For that we need to use curly braces. So let's say search will be equal to encode URI component and search. If it is not true, we just want to stay where we are. And let's say that delay will be 500 milliseconds. And then we can say return clear timeout. And delay. So why we do it? What we did now allows a user type into a search input, and after a short delay, which is 500 milliseconds, the app will update the URL with a query like search and then what we typed. And then we will show the filters which satisfy a user query. But now it will not happen. It's only a part of the process. I'm just explaining to you what's going on. Okay, so again, if there is no user, nothing happens. And this part waits for 500 milliseconds after the user stops typing, and then it changes the URL using navigate. And if the search box is empty, it just goes to the slash or stays where it is. If the search has content, it navigates to search and what we typed. And then while we use this clear timeout, every time the user types something new, we cancel the previous timeout to avoid triggering multiple navigations. It's a simple way to debounce the search. Okay, so now let's save it. And now I will type something like this, and here you will see what I typed, but the nodes will not, I will not see the nodes which satisfy my query. We'll handle it a bit later. For now, I will type something like this. And as you can see, here we have search, and it is what I typed, as you can see. Okay, now let's remove it, and it is gone. Let's type something like this, and here it is. So now we want to show the nodes according to my query. So let's try to do it. So for that, we need to open home.jsx. So for that, we can do the following. We can say const location will be equal to use location, which comes from React router DOM. So to get access to that search query which user types, we need this location, and we use this use location function that comes from React router DOM. And then in our fetch nodes function, here we can say const search params, so what a user types, and here we can say new URL search params and location dot search. Okay, then we can say const search will be equal to search params dot get and search, or empty string if nothing is there. Okay, then here after this data we can say const filtered nodes will be equal to, if search is true, then based on that we can say data.filter node node.title to lowercase, or node.description dot to lowercase includes search to lowercase. So looks like we have an error somewhere. Then okay, and actually I should write includes here as well. Okay, so if search is true, then we want to filter our data based on if node.title includes search or if description includes search. If not, we want to leave data as it is. And looks like we have an error because of some parentheses, I think. And then we want to say set nodes to be equal to filtered nodes. And here our use effect should depend on location dot search. So it has to be outside. Okay, it has to be here. Okay, now it is better. You can really get confused when you have a lot of these parentheses. So let's save it. And let's try to type something like this. And looks like nothing has changed. Nothing is working. So here I should remove it first. Then I should have a closing parenthesis here, I guess. And then I should remove one here. I think so. So let's try one more time. And now it is working as we expect. So we need to be really careful when we have a lot of these parentheses and so on. I think that you understand it. Okay, let's remove it. And let's write something like test. And we have what we need. Well, now let's try to log out and register. Here I will say John. john@gmail.com, and password. Okay. And here John doesn't have any nodes, so that's why it is like that. And here we have this test, but I don't want it to be like that. So we still have this test. So I think that to get rid of that, inside our navbar, we can do the following. So we can have one more use effect, which will depend on a user. So let's say use effect. And we want to say set search to be empty whenever a user changes. So let's say user, let's save it. And now let's say test, let's see if everything is working correctly. Yes, looks like it is correct. So let's do it like this. Let's do it like this. Let's remove it. Okay, let's write something like this. Now let's try to refresh the page, for example. Okay. And yeah, looks like it is correct. Now I will try to write something like this. Then I will log out. Then I will log in as John. Now I will write a password. So let's try to log in. And it is gone. Yes, we fixed it. So now that's it, guys. It's time to deploy our application. Okay, guys, now it's time to deploy our application. But before that, inside frontend folder, inside this package.json, we need to copy this, and from dev dependencies, we should put it inside dependencies. Otherwise, we will have errors when we deploy our application. So let's remove it. Okay, so let's save it. And now inside .env here, we can create a new variable called node_env will be equal to production. Okay. Now inside this server.js, we need to do the following. Now I will paste some code and then I will try to explain everything to you in detail. As you can see the following, but before we need to import path from path. Okay, so what does it do? Okay, now let's look at how we serve a React frontend with an Express backend in production. After building the React app, all the frontend code is inside frontend dist. That's what we want to serve to users. In ES modules, dir name isn't available, so we use path.resolve to get the current directory. So this gives the absolute path to the root of the project, and we will use it for all file paths. Okay, and it means that this code will only run if process.env.node_env is equal to production. Okay, then we have here express.static. This line tells Express to serve static files from the frontend dist folder. Then we have path.join, frontend dist, and so on. So if a user visits the homepage or opens CSS or JS, Express will return those files directly from here. And React apps often use client-side routing. That means routes like /dashboard or /profile are handled on the frontend, not by Express. So this app.get and splat, this line is a catch-all. If Express doesn't find a file or API route, it returns index.html. So React can handle the route on the client side. So this setup ensures that in production, our React app loads properly. Okay, so I think that it is clear to you. If you have some questions, feel free to write them in the comments. And now inside this package.json, we need to do the following. Okay, here under this dev, we can do the following. We can say build and say the following: npm install and npm install prefix frontend and npm run build prefix frontend. So this command prepares the project for production. npm install, it installs backend dependencies. Then npm install prefix frontend, it goes into the frontend folder and installs dependencies for the React app, and npm run build prefix frontend builds the React frontend. It generates static files inside frontend dist, which we have just covered. Okay, and for the start command, we can say node backend server.js. So this starts the backend using plain Node.js, no auto restart like in development. It's meant for production only. So npm run dev is for local development with live reload. Npm run build installs everything and builds the React app, and npm start launches the app in production mode. So let's save it. Okay, now we can push our code to GitHub. Okay. Now let's write git init. And as you can see, even .env is taken into account, but we don't want that. So we can take this git ignore and put it here. And then inside this .git ignore, we can say .env, so we want to ignore it. And now it isn't taken anymore. Okay. Now let's say git adds, and we want to add everything. Git status. Okay, so let's clear it, and let's say git commit, initial commit. Now let's create a repository. So here I will click new, and here I will say MERN nodes app. I will make it to be private, but after publishing the video, it will be public. So let's click this button. And let's copy this and paste it here. Now let's copy this and paste it here. Okay, now let's copy this and paste it here. Okay, we have pushed our code to GitHub. Now, if I refresh the page, we can see our codes. Okay, now before going to render.com, I would like to say that in network access, I allowed access from anywhere so that you will be able to get access to your application from everywhere. Also, you will be able to handle that in render.com itself. But for the sake of this tutorial, to make things as simple as possible, I allowed access from anywhere. Okay, here let's click dashboard. Then we need to sign in to render using one of these. I will use GitHub. Okay, now let's click add new web service. And from here, we can choose our projects. And here I also added a new project. You can do it very easily. It isn't difficult at all. So here I will choose this newly added project. And here everything will be like that. But here we need to say npm run build and npm run start. Then we want to choose free version, and here we need to provide environment variables. So let's copy them and paste it here. So here they are. Let's click this button and let's click deploy web service. As you can see, if you click this connect, you'll get a list of IP addresses using which you'll be able to connect to your database. But I decided to allow access from anywhere. It is possible as well. So as you can see, we have this, your service is live. So let's open it. Let's try to log in as Robert. As you can see, we have our nodes. Let's try to delete something. Let's try to create something. Okay, let's try to refresh it. And everything is correct. Let's try to filter. Okay, that's it guys. If you find this video at least a little helpful, please hit the like button, share this video with your friends, and subscribe to this channel if you haven't done it yet. Thank you so much, I really appreciate it.